Maya Johnson wiped down the counter of Roadside Diner for what felt like the 100th time that day. The old establishment sat like a forgotten relic along Highway 49, its neon sign flickering intermittently against the darkening California sky. At 23, Maya had been working at the diner for nearly 2 years, saving every penny she could while attending community college part-time. Her dreams stretched far beyond the grease-stained walls and worn vinyl booths, but, for now, this job paid the bills and helped support her younger brother's education. The dinner rush had just ended, and Maya was looking forward to a quiet evening shift when the unmistakable rumble of motorcycle engines began echoing in the distance. She glanced through the large front window and felt her stomach tighten. A convoy of Harley-Davidson motorcycles was approaching, their chrome gleaming under the parking lot lights. The distinctive roar grew louder as they pulled into the lot, and Maya could see the familiar patches on their leather jackets even from inside. Hell's Angels. Maya had heard stories about the motorcycle club from other waitresses who had worked the highway diners longer than she had. Some tales were probably exaggerated, but the reputation was intimidating enough. She watched as nearly a dozen bikers dismounted their machines, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel. They moved with a confidence that suggested they owned whatever space they occupied, and Maya felt her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her uniform apron. The first man through the door was massive, standing well over 6 feet tall with arms covered in intricate tattoos. His beard was streaked with gray, and his eyes swept the diner with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to assessing potential threats. Behind him followed a diverse group of men and women, all wearing the club's colors with unmistakable pride. Their conversations were loud and boisterous, filled with laughter and crude jokes that echoed off the diner's walls. Maya's manager, Pete, emerged from the kitchen with a nervous smile plastered on his face. Pete was a good man who had given Maya a chance when other places wouldn't hire her, but she could see the anxiety written across his features as he approached the bikers. "Evening, folks," he said, his voice slightly higher than usual. "Welcome to Roadside Diner. Sit anywhere you'd like." The large man who had entered first nodded curtly and gestured toward the back section of the diner where several tables could be pushed together. "We'll take that corner," he said in a gravelly voice that suggested years of cigarettes and whiskey. "Been riding all day, and we're hungry as hell." Maya watched as the group settled into their chosen area, their leather jackets creaking as they arranged themselves around the tables. She could feel their eyes on her as she gathered menus, and she forced herself to walk steadily toward their section. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but she had learned to hide her nervousness behind a professional smile that had served her well in customer service. "Good evening," Maya said as she approached their table, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The bearded leader looked up at her with piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. For a moment, the table fell silent, and Maya felt the weight of their collective attention. She had experienced this before, the moment when people decided whether to treat her with respect or something less. In her experience, it could go either way, regardless of who the customers were. "Coffee," the man said finally. "Black, and keep it coming." He gestured around the table. "Same for most of us, I'd guess. Been a long ride." The tension at the table seemed to ease slightly as the others began placing their drink orders. Maya noticed that despite their intimidating appearance, they said please and thank you more often than many of her regular customers. She found herself relaxing incrementally as she took their orders, though she remained alert and professional. As Maya returned to the counter to prepare their drinks, she caught fragments of their conversation. They were discussing routes and weather, complaining about traffic in various cities, and sharing stories about mechanical problems with their bikes. It sounded remarkably similar to conversations she had overheard among truckers and other travelers who frequented the diner. Beneath the leather and tattoos, there were people talking about the practical concerns of life on the road. When Maya returned with a tray full of coffee cups, one of the women in the group smiled at her genuinely. "Thank you, honey," she said, her voice warm despite the fierce dragon tattoo that curved around her neck. "You're very kind." "My pleasure," Maya replied, surprised by the woman's friendly demeanor. She had expected hostility or at best indifference, but she was encountering something closer to ordinary courtesy. As she distributed the cups around the tables, Maya couldn't help but notice the motorcycles visible through the window. Even in the dim parking lot lighting, she could make out the distinctive shapes and chrome details of the Harley-Davidsons. Her father had taught her to recognize different motorcycle models when she was young, and she found herself studying the bikes with genuine interest rather than fear. One motorcycle in particular caught her attention. Parked slightly apart from the others was a beautifully restored Harley-Davidson Electra Glide, its deep blue paint gleaming even in the artificial light. The bike appeared to be from the early 1970s, and Maya could see that it had been maintained with obvious care and attention to detail. The chrome was spotless, and custom details suggested that the owner had invested considerable time and money into the restoration. "That's quite a collection of bikes you have out there," Maya commented as she finished serving the coffee, unable to keep the admiration out of her voice completely. The bearded man, who the others seemed to defer to as their leader, looked up from his menu with raised eyebrows. "You know motorcycles?" he asked, his tone suggesting surprise rather than skepticism. "A little," Maya admitted. "My father was really into bikes when I was growing up. He used to take me to bike shows and teach me about different models and years." She hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "That blue Electra Glide out there is gorgeous." Early 70s. A different kind of silence fell over the table, and Maya wondered if she had somehow overstepped. But then, the bearded man's expression shifted to something approaching respect. 1973, he said slowly. "You've got a good eye? That's my ride." "It's beautiful," Maya said sincerely. "The restoration work is incredible. Whoever did the work really knew what they were doing." "Did most of it myself," the man replied, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. "Took me 3 years to get her looking right. Found her in a junkyard in Nevada, rusted to hell and back." Maya nodded appreciatively. "My dad always said that the best bikes were the ones you saved from the scrap heap. Something about giving them a second chance at life." She smiled at the memory. He had this old shovelhead that he rebuilt from the frame up. Spent every weekend in the garage working on it. "Shovelhead, huh?" Another biker, this one with long gray hair tied back in a ponytail, leaned forward with interest. "What year?" 1978, Maya replied automatically. He called her Blue Thunder because of the paint job and the way the exhaust sounded when he opened her up. The bikers exchanged glances, and Maya sensed that she had somehow passed some sort of test without realizing it. The atmosphere at the table had shifted from polite tolerance to genuine interest, and she found herself relaxing further. "Your old man still ride?" the bearded leader asked. Maya's expression grew somber, and she shook her head slowly. "He passed away 5 years ago," she said quietly. "Cancer. But he rode right up until the end. Said the bike was the only thing that made him feel free during the treatments." "Sorry for your loss," the man said, and his words carried a weight that suggested he understood the significance of what she had shared. "Sounds like he was a righteous dude." "He was," Maya agreed, surprised by the unexpected comfort she felt in sharing this memory with strangers. "He always said that motorcycles brought together people who might never have anything else in common. Didn't matter what you looked like or where you came from. If you loved to ride, you were family." The woman with the dragon tattoo nodded knowingly. "Smart man. That's the truth of it, right there." Maya realized she had been standing at their table longer than was strictly professional, but the conversation felt natural and comfortable in a way that surprised her. "I should let you folks look at the menu," she said, taking a step back. "The meatloaf is really good tonight, and Pete makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. We'll keep that in mind," the bearded leader said with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "What's your name again?" "Maya. Maya Johnson." "I'm Tank," he said, extending a massive hand for her to shake. His grip was firm but not crushing, and his palm was calloused from years of manual work. "These miscreants are my road family." As Maya shook hands with Tank, she felt a connection that transcended the obvious differences between them. Here was a man who, despite his intimidating appearance, had listened to her talk about her father with genuine respect and understanding. The moment felt significant in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Nice to meet you, Tank, Maya said, meaning it sincerely. I'll give you folks a few more minutes to decide what you'd like to eat. As Maya walked back toward the kitchen to check on other tasks, she could hear the conversation at the biker's table continuing. But now it seemed to include occasional comments about her father's motorcycle and questions about different restoration techniques. She found herself smiling as she wiped down tables and refilled coffee for the few other customers in the diner. When she returned to take their food orders 20 minutes later, the dynamic had shifted entirely. The bikers greeted her like an old friend, and several of them had specific questions about her father's shovelhead. Tank ordered the meatloaf on her recommendation, and most of the others followed his lead. The woman with the dragon tattoo, who introduced herself as Snake, asked about the apple pie with genuine enthusiasm. Your dad teach you to ride? Tank asked as Maya jotted down the last of their orders. He started to, Maya replied. I was learning on his bike the summer before my senior year of high school. But then he got sick, and she trailed off, not wanting to bring down the mood with sad details. You should finish what he started, Snake said firmly. It's what he would have wanted. Maya nodded, touched by the woman's certainty. Maybe someday. Right now I'm focused on school and work, trying to build something stable. What are you studying? Tank asked, and Maya was surprised by his genuine interest. Business administration, she replied. I want to open my own restaurant eventually. Something like this, but maybe a little more upscale. A place where travelers can get a really good meal and feel welcome. That's a solid dream, Tank said approvingly. Takes guts to build something from nothing. As Maya headed back to the kitchen to place their order, she reflected on how dramatically the evening had shifted from her initial fears. The Hells Angels had turned out to be complex people with interests and stories that went far beyond their intimidating appearance. Her father's love of motorcycles had created an unexpected bridge between her world and theirs. The food came up quickly, and Maya found herself looking forward to returning to their table. She balanced multiple plates on her arms with practiced ease and made her way back to the corner section. The aroma of meatloaf and mashed potatoes filled the air, and she could see the biker's obvious appreciation for the generous portions. Here we go, Maya announced as she began distributing the plates. Meatloaf for Tank, chicken fried steak for Snake, and burgers all around for the rest of you. As the bikers began eating, their conversation continued to include Maya whenever she passed by their table. They asked about her college classes, her future restaurant plans, and shared stories about memorable meals they had encountered on the road. Maya found herself lingering longer than was strictly necessary, drawn into their easy camaraderie. This is excellent, Tank said around a mouthful of meatloaf. Your recommendation was spot on. Pete's been perfecting that recipe for 15 years, Maya replied, proud the dinner plates had been cleared away, and most of the Hells Angels were nursing their second or third cups of coffee when the conversation took an unexpected turn. Tank had been telling a story about a mechanical breakdown in the middle of the Nevada desert when Snake interrupted him with a question directed at Maya. Your father's shovelhead, Snake said, stirring sugar into her coffee thoughtfully. You said it was a 78? That's interesting timing. Maya looked puzzled. What do you mean? Well, 78 was the last year they made the shovelhead before switching to the Evolution engine, Snake explained. Your dad picked a good one to restore. Those last year shovels are getting pretty valuable now. He always said he bought it because it was what he could afford at the time, Maya replied with a smile. But he loved that bike more than anything except maybe my mom and us kids. Tank leaned back in his chair, studying Maya's face with renewed interest. What did your old man do for work? Must have been pretty handy with tools to rebuild a shovelhead from scratch. Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest whenever the subject of her father's profession came up. Over the years, she had learned to navigate these conversations carefully, sharing just enough information to be truthful without inviting unwanted questions or judgment. He was in construction, Maya said, which was technically accurate. Heavy equipment operation, mostly. But he could fix anything with an engine. Cars, trucks, motorcycles. If it had moving parts, he could make it run better than new. Construction, huh? Tank nodded approvingly. Honest work. Takes a special kind of man to handle the big machines. Maya felt the familiar weight of the partial truth. Her father had indeed operated heavy equipment, but The construction sites where he worked had often been far from conventional. Samuel Heavy Johnson had spent most of his adult life building and maintaining facilities for various motorcycle clubs throughout California and Nevada. It was work that paid extremely well and kept him on the road for weeks at a time, but it had also required him to navigate a complex world of alliances and rivalries that Maya was only beginning to understand. He was gone a lot, Maya said carefully. Traveled all over the state for different projects. But when he was home, he spent all his time in the garage working on that bike or teaching me and my brother about engines. Sounds like a good father, Snake observed. Teaching his kids real skills instead of just parking them in front of the TV. He was the best, Maya agreed, feeling the familiar ache of missing him. He always said that knowing how to fix things gave you freedom. If you could maintain your own bike, you never had to depend on anyone else to keep moving. Tank's expression grew thoughtful, and he exchanged a meaningful glance with several of the other bikers. Your father ever mention which clubs he worked with? Construction crews that specialized in motorcycle club facilities? Maya felt her stomach flutter nervously. This was the territory she had learned to avoid discussing. Her father had been very specific about keeping his work life separate from his family, and he had made it clear that certain information was not to be shared outside their household. He didn't talk much about the specifics of his jobs, Maya said truthfully. Said work was work, and home was home, and the two shouldn't mix. Smart man, Tank said with a note of respect. Professional discretion is important in any line of work. But Maya could see the wheels turning behind Tank's eyes, and she sensed that her careful non-answers had actually provided more information than she intended. The bikers were clearly processing something significant, though she wasn't sure what conclusions they were drawing. "What about the bike?" asked a younger biker named Crow who had been mostly silent during the evening. "What happened to your dad's shovelhead after he passed?" This question hit Maya harder than she expected. She had to take a moment to compose herself before answering. "Mom sold it," she said quietly. "We needed the money for medical bills and funeral expenses. Dad had some insurance, but not enough to cover everything." The table fell silent, and Maya could see genuine sympathy in the faces around her. These were people who understood the significance of losing a beloved motorcycle, especially one with such personal meaning. "That's rough," Tank said simply. "Selling a man's bike is like selling a piece of his soul." "I tried to talk her out of it," Maya continued, surprised by her own willingness to share this painful memory. "I even offered to take over the payments or find some other way to keep it. But Mom was overwhelmed with everything, and she said it was too painful to look at anyway." "Who bought it?" Snake asked gently. "Some collector from up north," Maya replied. "Said he specialized in restored Harleys from that era. Paid cash and had it loaded on a trailer within 2 days." She shook her head at the memory. "I never even got a chance to ride it one more time." Tank reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "What did you say your father's name was again?" "Samuel Johnson," Maya replied, wondering why Tank needed to know. But everyone called him Heavy because of his size and the fact that he operated the big equipment. Tank's fingers moved rapidly across his phone screen, and Maya could see him scrolling through what appeared to be contacts or messages. After a moment, his expression changed dramatically, shifting from casual interest to something much more intense. "Heavy Johnson," Tank said slowly, his voice carrying a new weight. "Built the clubhouse in Riverside back in '98? Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Her father had told her about the Riverside project. It had been one of his biggest jobs, requiring him to be away from home for nearly 3 months. But he had never mentioned which club had hired him, and Maya had never thought to ask. I think so," Maya stammered. "The timing sounds right. He was gone most of that summer working on some big facility." "Son of a bitch," Tank breathed. And suddenly, every biker at the table was leaning forward with intense interest. "Heavy Johnson was your father?" Maya nodded uncertainly, not understanding why this information had such a dramatic effect on the group. "You knew him?" "Knew him," Tank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Maya, your father was a legend. He built facilities for half the clubs in California. Our clubhouse in Oakland, the Riverside place, the compound up in Eureka, that was all Heavy's work." Maya stared at Tank in shock. She had known that her father's construction work involved motorcycle clubs, but She had never realized the scope or significance of his contributions to their community. He was the most stand-up contractor any of us ever worked with, Snake added, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Always delivered exactly what he promised, on time and under budget. And he never talked about one club's business with another club. That kind of discretion is rare. More than that, Tank continued, his voice growing more animated. Heavy saved our asses more than once. When the city was giving us grief about building permits for the Oakland clubhouse, your dad knew exactly which inspectors to work with and how to make everything legal and above board. He had connections everywhere. Maya felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Her understanding of her father's work was being completely rewritten by people who had actually known him in that context. She had always known he was skilled and well-respected, but she had never imagined that his reputation extended throughout the motorcycle club community. There was this one time, Tank continued, warming to his subject, when we were having problems with some rival club trying to sabotage the construction site. Heavy showed up the next morning with his own security crew, guys who could handle themselves if things got ugly. Never said a word about it, never charged us extra. Just made sure the work got done safely. That sounds like Dad, Maya said softly. He never liked bullies, and he always finished what he started. The man had principles, another biker chimed in, and he knew how to build things that would last. That Riverside clubhouse has been through earthquakes, floods, and everything else California could throw at it, and it's still solid as a rock. Maya found herself struggling to process this new information about her father. She had always known he was a good man who took pride in his work, but she was learning that his reputation in the motorcycle club world was far more significant than she had ever imagined. He talk about the work at home? Tank asked curiously. Not really, Maya replied. He said that what happened on job sites stayed on job sites. The only time he really opened up about work was when he was teaching me about construction techniques or problem solving. Smart policy, Tank nodded approvingly. But I bet he taught you more than you realized. Heavy had a way of explaining complex problems in simple terms that anyone could understand. Maya smiled at that. He did. I remember him explaining load-bearing principles using my toy blocks when I was 7. And he taught me to read blueprints by showing me how houses were put together. Classic Heavy, Snake laughed. The man could turn anything into a teaching moment. As the conversation continued, Maya began to see her father through the eyes of people who had worked with him professionally. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been not just skilled but genuinely respected across a community that valued loyalty and integrity above almost everything else. I have to ask, Tank said, his tone growing more serious. That 78 shovel head of his. You remember anything specific about how it looked? Any custom work or distinctive features? Maya thought back to the countless hours she had spent in the garage watching her father work on the bike. It was blue, a deep, metallic blue that almost looked purple in certain light. He had custom chrome exhaust pipes that he polished every weekend. And there was this eagle decal on the tank that he said represented freedom. Tank's expression grew even more intense. Chrome forward controls? Custom seat with white stitching. Yes, Maya said, surprised by the accuracy of his description. How did you know that? Maya stared at Tank in complete disbelief, her mind struggling to process what he had just told her. The diner seemed to fade away around her as she focused entirely on the phone screen displaying the photograph of her father's motorcycle. That's impossible, she whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch the screen. The collector who bought it said he was taking it up north. That was 5 years ago. Tank's expression softened as he watched Maya's reaction. The collector's name was Frank Morrison, right? Older guy, maybe 65, drove a fancy truck with an enclosed trailer? Maya nodded mutely, still staring at the photograph. Every detail was exactly as she remembered. The custom chrome work her father had spent months perfecting, the distinctive eagle decal, even the small scratch on the tank that had resulted from a dropped wrench during one of their garage sessions. Frank's a good man, Tank continued gently. He buys bikes from families who need the money, but he doesn't keep them. He restores them if they need work, then finds them proper homes with people who will appreciate what they represent. I don't understand, Maya said, finally, looking up from the phone. Why would he sell it to you? Did you know it was my father's bike? Tank leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. Frank knew exactly whose bike it was. Heavy Johnson's reputation preceded that shovelhead by about 20 years. When Frank called to tell me he had it available, I dropped everything and drove 8 hours to pick it up personally. Maya felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure whether they were tears of joy or sorrow. So you've had it all this time? 5 years next month, Tank confirmed. Been taking care of it like it was my own flesh and blood. Your father built that bike to last generations, and I've made sure it stays exactly the way he intended. Snake reached across the table and gently touched Maya's hand. Honey, Tank has been looking for Heavy's family for years. He wanted to find you and your brother, but all he had was a name and the knowledge that Heavy had kids somewhere in California. Looking for us? Maya repeated, confusion evident in her voice. Why? Tank shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Maya sensed that she was about to learn something significant. Because that bike doesn't belong to me, he said simply. It belongs to Heavy's family. It always has. Maya felt the room spinning slightly as she tried to understand the implications of what Tank was saying. But you bought it. You paid for it. I paid Frank for his time and the restoration work he had done, Tank clarified. But I never considered myself the owner. I was more like a caretaker, someone keeping it safe until Heavy's kids were ready to claim their inheritance. The other bikers around the table nodded in agreement, and Maya realized that this had been their collective understanding all along. Her father's motorcycle had been waiting for her to find it, not the other way around. This is too much, Maya said, shaking her head. I can't accept something like that. You've been caring for it for 5 years, maintaining it, keeping it running. It's yours now. Tank's expression grew stern, and for the first time that evening, Maya glimpsed the authority that had made him a leader among these formidable people. Maya, let me explain something about motorcycle club culture. When a righteous man builds something with his own hands, that creation carries his spirit. Your father's bike isn't just a machine, it's a piece of his legacy. And legacy belongs with family. Besides, Snake added with a smile, Tank's been driving us crazy for years talking about finding Heavy's kids. He's researched genealogy websites, contacted motorcycle restoration forums, even hired a private investigator at one point. You showing up here tonight isn't coincidence, it's fate. Maya looked around the table at the faces of the bikers, seeing nothing but sincerity and genuine emotion. These tough, intimidating people had spent years safeguarding something precious that belonged to her family, with no expectation of reward or recognition. I need to see it, Maya said suddenly. I need to see the bike in person. Tank nodded immediately. Of course. My place is just down the road. We can ride over there right now if you want. But I'm still working, Maya protested, glancing toward Pete, who was watching their table with obvious curiosity. Go ahead, Maya, Pete called from behind the counter, apparently having overheard enough of the conversation to understand its significance. I can handle the rest of the evening. This is important. Maya looked back at Tank, suddenly, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. I don't have a way to get there. My car is pretty unreliable, and I don't know if it would make it. You can ride with me, Tank said matter-of-factly. Snake's got an extra helmet in her saddlebag. The thought of riding on a Harley-Davidson for the first time since her father's death filled Maya with both excitement and terror. She hadn't been on the back of a motorcycle in over 8 years, not since the summer her father had started teaching her to ride. Are you sure? Maya asked, her voice uncertain. Trust me, Tank replied. Your father taught you that bikes bring people together, right? This is exactly what he was talking about. Maya took a deep breath and made her decision. Okay, let me get my jacket and tell Pete I'm leaving early. As Maya hurried to gather her belongings, the excitement at the biker's table was palpable. Snake rummaged through her saddlebag and produced a spare helmet, while the others finished their coffee and prepared to escort Maya to what felt like a reunion with her father's memory. You sure about this? Pete asked quietly as Maya grabbed her jacket from the employee area. I know these folks seem nice enough, but they're still Hell's Angels. Maya smiled at Pete's protective concern. They knew my father, Pete. They've been taking care of his motorcycle for years, waiting to give it back to our family. These are good people. Pete nodded reluctantly. Just be careful, okay? And call me when you get home so I know you made it safely. I will, Maya promised. Then, hurried back to join the bikers who were already heading toward the door. The evening air was cool and crisp as the group gathered around their motorcycles in the parking lot. Maya watched as Tank performed a quick inspection of his Electroglide, checking fluid levels and tire pressure with the automatic movements of someone who had done these same checks thousands of times. "Here," Snake said, handing Maya the spare helmet. "Your dad would have insisted on proper safety gear." Maya slipped the helmet over her head, and immediately she was transported back to her teenage years when her father had performed this same ritual before their practice rides. The weight and feel of the helmet brought back a flood of memories. The excitement of learning to ride, the trust required to lean into curves, the indescribable freedom of moving through the landscape at speed. Tank straddled his bike and kicked it to life, the distinctive rumble of the Harley engine filling the parking lot. He gestured for Maya to climb on behind him, and she swung her leg over the seat with movements that felt surprisingly natural despite the years that had passed. "Hold on tight," Tank called over the engine noise. "And don't fight the bike when we lean into turns. Let the machine do the work." Maya wrapped her arms around Tank's substantial midsection, surprised by how secure and safe she felt despite the obvious power of the motorcycle beneath them. As Tank slowly pulled out of the parking lot with the other bikers forming an escort around them, Maya felt a connection to her father that she hadn't experienced since his death. The ride to Tank's property took 15 minutes along winding country roads that Maya had never explored despite living in the area for years. The sensation of speed and motion was intoxicating, and she found herself understanding once again why her father had been so passionate about motorcycles. There was indeed something magical about moving through the landscape with nothing between you and the world except the machine you rode. Tank's house turned out to be a modest ranch-style home set back from the road on several acres of property. But it was the large garage building behind the house that drew Maya's immediate attention. Even in the darkness, she could see that it was a serious workshop facility, the kind of place where significant mechanical work could be accomplished. Tank parked his bike near the garage and helped Maya dismount, then walked over to a side door and flipped on the interior lights. Maya followed him inside and gasped at what she saw. The garage was immaculate, with professional-grade equipment and enough space for a dozen motorcycles. Several bikes in various stages of restoration occupied workstations around the perimeter, but it was the motorcycle in the center of the space that captured Maya's complete attention. Her father's 1978 shovelhead sat under a custom cover, positioned as if it were a piece of art on display. Tank walked over and carefully removed the cover, revealing the bike in all its restored glory. Maya felt her knees go weak as she approached the motorcycle. It was even more beautiful than she remembered, every surface polished to a mirror finish and every component obviously maintained with obsessive care. The deep blue paint seemed to glow under the garage lights, and the chrome work reflected her image like a series of funhouse mirrors. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, reaching out to touch the familiar handlebars. "It's exactly the same. Better than the same," Tank corrected gently. "I've made a few improvements over the years. Upgraded the electrical system, rebuilt the carburetor, replaced all the gaskets and seals. Even the small scratch on the tank was still visible, though Tank had clearly kept it from rusting or growing larger." "The engine runs?" Maya asked, running her fingers along the fuel tank. "Like a dream," Tank replied proudly. "I start it up every weekend and take it for a ride to keep everything lubricated and in working order. Your father would have wanted it to be ridden, not just preserved." Maya felt tears running down her cheeks, though she wasn't entirely sure when she had started crying. Standing next to her father's motorcycle, surrounded by people who had respected and cared for his memory, she felt closer to him than she had since the day he died. "I don't know what to say," Maya admitted, her voice thick with emotion. Maya stood transfixed beside her father's motorcycle, her hands trembling as she traced the familiar contours of the fuel tank. Tank watched her carefully, and she could sense that he was wrestling with how much more to reveal. The other bikers had formed a respectful semicircle around them, their expressions suggesting that they too were waiting for something significant to unfold. "Maya," Tank said finally, his voice carrying a weight that made her look up from the bike. "There's something else you need to know about your father." something that goes deeper than just construction work. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Throughout the evening, she had sensed that there were layers to her father's story that she had never fully understood. What do you mean? Tank walked over to a large metal cabinet against the garage wall and pulled out a set of keys. Your father didn't just work for motorcycle clubs, he said as he unlocked the cabinet. He was family to us. Real family. The cabinet doors swung open to reveal shelves lined with motorcycle memorabilia, photographs, and what appeared to be official documents. Tank reached for a thick photo album and carried it back to where Maya was standing. Heavy Johnson wasn't just a contractor, Tank explained as he opened the album. He was a prospect for our chapter back in the late 80s. Came closer to earning his full patch than any civilian we'd ever worked with. Maya stared at Tank in shock. A prospect? You mean he was trying to join the Hells Angels? For 3 years, Snake confirmed, stepping forward to look at the photo album. From 87 to 90. Smartest, most dedicated prospect we ever had. Tank began turning pages in the album, revealing photographs that made Maya's world shift on its axis. There was her father, 25 years younger, standing beside various motorcycles with groups of Hells Angels. In some photos, he wore the leather vest of a prospect. In others, he was dressed in work clothes at construction sites. But in all of them, he appeared completely at home among the club members. I don't understand, Maya said weakly. He never mentioned anything about this. Not once. He wouldn't have, Tank replied gently. What happened between your father and the club was complicated, and it ended with an agreement that certain things would never be discussed outside these walls. Maya sank onto a nearby stool, feeling overwhelmed by these revelations about her father's hidden past. What happened? Why didn't he become a full member? Tank and Snake exchanged a meaningful look before Tank continued. Your father had to make a choice. The club life and family life, sometimes they don't mix well. He chose family. But there was more to it than that, Snake added softly. Heavy was offered his full patch, but accepting it would have meant moving to another state and taking on responsibilities that would have kept him away from you and your brother for months at a time. Tank turned more pages in the album, showing Maya photographs of her father at club events, motorcycle rallies, and construction projects. In every image, he appeared to be an integral part of the community, respected and valued by everyone around him. The choice tore him up inside. Tank continued. He loved the brotherhood, respected what we stood for, but he loved his family more. So he made a deal with the club leadership. What kind of deal? Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready for the answer. He became something unique, Tank explained. Not a full member, but not an outsider either. He was what we called an allied contractor. Someone who could work with multiple chapters, someone we could trust with our most sensitive construction projects, someone who was family without wearing the patch. Maya looked back at the photographs with new understanding. Her father's frequent travel, his connections throughout the motorcycle community, his insistence on discretion about his work, it all made sense now. The clubs paid him well because they knew they could trust him completely, Snake added. And they gave him the freedom to prioritize his family while still being part of the brotherhood. But why didn't he ever tell me any of this? Maya asked, her voice filled with confusion and hurt. Tank's expression grew sympathetic. Because he was protecting you. The club life can be dangerous, and Heavy never wanted that danger to touch his family. Keeping you separate from this world was his way of keeping you safe. Plus, Snake added gently, he probably figured you'd learn about it when you were ready. When you were old enough to understand the complexity of it all. Maya stared at a photograph of her father standing beside his shovelhead at what appeared to be a massive motorcycle rally. He looked proud and happy, surrounded by hundreds of bikers who obviously respected and accepted him. So all those weekends in the garage, Maya said slowly. All those hours he spent teaching me about motorcycles and construction. He was preparing me for this world? In a way, Tank confirmed. Heavy always said his kids had the right to choose their own path. But he wanted to make sure you had the knowledge and skills to navigate any world you might encounter. Tank turned to another section of the album, revealing more recent photographs. Maya gasped when she saw images of her father's funeral, attended by dozens of Hells Angels from multiple chapters. She recognized none of the faces, but she could see the genuine grief and respect in their expressions. You were all there? Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Every chapter in California sent representatives, Tank replied. Heavy was our brother, patch or no patch. We honored him the way he deserved to be honored. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she realized how much of her father's life and death had occurred in a world she never knew existed. Why didn't anyone approach our family? Why didn't you tell us who you were? Because Heavy made us promise not to, Snake said gently. His last request was that his family be allowed to grieve in private, without the complications that come with club connections. He wanted to protect you even after he was gone. Maya looked around the garage at the faces of these people who had loved and respected her father in ways she was only beginning to understand. But you kept his bike. You've been taking care of it all this time. Because we knew that someday you'd find your way back to us, Tank said simply. Heavy always said his kids had his blood, and his blood belonged to the road. He knew that eventually you'd need to understand where you came from. Maya walked back to her father's motorcycle, seeing it now not just as a machine he had rebuilt, but as a symbol of a complex life she was only beginning to comprehend. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Tank replied. This bike is yours by right. You can take it and walk away. Keep it as a memory of your father. Or, Maya prompted. Or you can learn the rest of your father's story, Snake said. You can understand what it really means to be Heavy Johnson's daughter. Tank opened the photo album to its final section, revealing documents that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. There were construction contracts, building permits, and architectural plans. But there were also letters of recommendation, character references, and what appeared to be formal proposals. Your father didn't just build clubhouses, Tank explained. He designed security systems, planned escape routes, created defensive positions. He was a strategic thinker who understood how to protect people and property in dangerous situations. Maya studied the documents, recognizing her father's careful handwriting on many of them. The complexity and sophistication of the work was far beyond anything she had imagined him capable of. He was essentially a military engineer, Snake added. Self-taught, but brilliant. Some of the facilities he designed could withstand siege conditions if necessary. And all of this knowledge, Tank said, tapping the documents, all of these skills and connections, they're part of your inheritance too. Maya looked up from the documents to meet Tank's steady gaze. What are you saying? I'm saying that Heavy Johnson's daughter has the potential to continue her father's legacy in ways that could benefit a lot of people, Tank replied. The construction skills, the engineering knowledge, the ability to work with difficult clients in dangerous situations, these are valuable talents in our world. You're offering me work? Maya asked, trying to understand the implications. We're offering you the chance to be who your father raised you to be, Snake corrected gently. Someone who can bridge different worlds, someone who can build things that matter, someone who understands what loyalty and honor really mean. Maya felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. These people were offering her not just her father's motorcycle, but his entire legacy, his relationships, his reputation, his place in a community that operated by rules she was only beginning to understand. I need time to think about this, Maya said finally. Of course, Tank replied. This isn't a decision you make in one night. But while you're thinking, there's something else you should know. Maya braced herself for another revelation. Your father left instructions, Tank continued, reaching into the cabinet for another document. Specific instructions about what to do if his family ever reconnected with the club. Tank handed Maya an envelope with her name written on it in her father's distinctive handwriting. The sight of it made her knees weak, and she had to sit down on the stool again. He wrote this about 6 months before he died, Snake explained softly. Said if anything happened to him, and if his kids ever found their way back to us, we should give them this. Maya stared at the envelope, afraid to open it, but equally afraid to leave it sealed. After 5 years of missing her father, she was about to hear his voice again, and she wasn't sure she was emotionally prepared for that experience. Take your time, Tank said gently. Read it when you're ready. But know that whatever it says, you've got family here if you want it. Maya nodded, carefully tucking the envelope into her jacket pocket. Maya sat in her small apartment at 3 in the morning, her father's letter still unopened on the kitchen table before her. She had been staring at it for over an hour since Snake had dropped her off, afraid of what emotions it might unleash. The envelope showed signs of age, and her father's handwriting looked slightly shaky, suggesting he had written it during his illness. Finally, Maya took a deep breath and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages of her father's careful script, along with a small key she didn't recognize. She unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to the people who knew me best. I always hoped you would, when you were ready to understand the full truth about your old man. First, I want you to know that every choice I made was about protecting you and your brother while still honoring the bonds I had formed with my brothers in the clubs. It wasn't always easy to balance those two worlds, but I never regretted choosing my family first. By now, Tank has probably told you about my time as a prospect and the work I did for various chapters. What he might not have explained is why I specialized in construction and security design. It started as a way to earn money, but it became something much more important, a way to protect people I cared about. The motorcycle clubs get a bad reputation, but most of that comes from people who don't understand what they really represent. Yes, there are bad actors in any group, but the core values are solid: loyalty, brotherhood, protection of family, and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. These are values I tried to teach you, even if I couldn't explain where I learned them. Maya, you have skills and instincts that you inherited from me, but you also have something I never had: the ability to see multiple perspectives and bring different groups together. I watched you do this even as a child, making friends with kids from all backgrounds, finding common ground where others saw only differences. If you decide to work with the clubs, you could do incredible good. They need someone who understands both their world and the legitimate business world. They need bridges, not walls. But only do this if it feels right to you. Never let anyone pressure you into a life you don't want. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box number 247. Inside, you'll find some things that belong to you now, money I saved over the years, some jewelry that belonged to your grandmother, and documentation of work I did that might be useful to you someday. More important than any of that, you'll find photographs and stories about our family history that your mother never knew I was collecting. Our people have always been builders, Maya. Your great-grandfather built churches in the South during Reconstruction. Your grandfather built bridges for the WPA during the Depression. I built facilities for people who needed protection. Maybe you'll find your own way to build something that makes the world a little better. Whatever you choose, remember that you are loved, you are worthy, and you have the strength to handle anything life throws at you. The blood in your veins has survived slavery, Jim Crow, economic hardship, and every other challenge America could create. You come from survivors, Maya. Never forget that. I'm proud of the woman you've become, even though I won't be there to see all the amazing things you'll accomplish. Take care of your brother, trust your instincts, and always remember that home isn't a place. It's the people who love you unconditionally. All my love, Dad. P.S. That shovelhead runs better now than it ever did when I owned it. Tank is a master mechanic, and he's been waiting years to teach someone worthy of your father's legacy. If you decide to learn to ride it properly, there's no one I'd trust more to teach you. Maya set the letter down with tears streaming down her face. Even 5 years after his death, her father was still finding ways to guide and protect her. The letter answered questions she hadn't even known she had while raising new ones about her family's history and her own potential future. She picked up the small key, studying its worn brass surface. The idea that her father had left her a safety deposit box filled with family history and resources was both exciting and overwhelming. It suggested that he had been planning for this moment, the moment when she would need to understand her full inheritance. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Snake. "Hope you made it home safely. No pressure, but Tank wanted me to let you know that the garage is always open if you want to visit your dad's bike. We're here when you're ready." The message was followed by another from Tank himself. "Maya, your father would be proud of who you've become. Take all the time you need to decide what comes next. The bike will be waiting, and so will we." Maya smiled through her tears at the kindness these people had shown her. Just 12 hours earlier, She had feared them based on stereotypes and reputation. Now she was beginning to understand that they represented something much more complex and valuable than she had ever imagined. Over the next 3 days, Maya found herself thinking constantly about the revelations from that night at the diner. She went through the motions of her regular routine, classes, work, studying, but her mind was always elsewhere, processing what she had learned about her father and contemplating what it might mean for her future. On Thursday morning, Maya finally gathered the courage to visit First National Bank. The safety deposit box contained exactly what her father had promised: a substantial amount of cash, family jewelry, and thick folders full of photographs and documents she had never seen before. The photographs revealed a family history that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Her great-grandfather had indeed built churches throughout Alabama and Mississippi, often working for communities too poor to pay him, but building anyway because he believed everyone deserved a safe place to worship. Her grandfather's bridge-building work during the Depression had employed dozens of other black men when jobs were nearly impossible to find. But it was the documentation of her father's work that truly amazed Maya. The folders contained detailed plans for security systems, construction blueprints, and correspondence with club leaders from across the country. The scope and sophistication of his work was extraordinary, and Maya began to understand why he had been so highly respected in that world. One folder contained something particularly intriguing: preliminary plans for what appeared to be a community center designed specifically for motorcycle clubs to host charitable events and community outreach programs. The notes in her father's handwriting suggested that several clubs had been interested in pooling resources to build such a facility, but the project had stalled after his death. Maya studied these plans with growing excitement. Here was a way to honor her father's legacy while using her business education and his engineering knowledge to create something genuinely beneficial. The community center could serve as a bridge between the motorcycle clubs and the broader community, breaking down stereotypes while providing real services to people in need. That evening, Maya called Tank. "I've been thinking about everything you told me," she said without preamble when he answered. "And I found something in my father's papers that I think you should see." "I'm listening," Tank replied, his voice warm with interest. Maya described the community center plans, watching Tank's excitement grow as she explained her father's vision. It would be a place where clubs could host charity rides, community dinners, educational programs, Maya continued. "A way to show people who you really are instead of just fighting against stereotypes." "Heavy always was thinking 10 years ahead of the rest of us," Tank said with obvious admiration. This is exactly the kind of project he would have pushed for. "I want to finish what he started," Maya said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "But I want to do it right. I want to complete my business degree, learn everything I can about construction and project management, and then make this happen." "That's going to take time," Tank warned. "And it's going to take resources we don't currently have." "I know," Maya replied. "But my father spent 3 years learning your world before he committed to working with you. I figure I can invest 2 years in learning what I need to know to do this properly." Tank was quiet for a moment, and Maya could hear him discussing something with other people in the background. When he came back on the line, his voice carried a new energy. "Maya, I just talked to Snake and a couple of other chapter officers. We want to support this project, but we want to do it right too. What if we offered you a different kind of partnership?" "What do you mean?" "Finish your degree," Tank said, "but spend your free time learning construction and engineering from people who worked with your father. We've got contacts throughout the building trades who would be honored to teach Heavy Johnson's daughter. And when you're ready to move forward with the community center project, the clubs will provide the initial funding and labor." Maya felt her heart racing with excitement. This was more than she had dared to hope for. A chance to honor her father's legacy while building something that could make a real difference in the world. "There's one condition," Tank continued. "You have to learn to ride that shovelhead properly. Your father intended for it to be ridden, not just preserved, and he would want his daughter to experience the freedom he found on the road." Maya laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I think I can manage that." "Good. Come by this weekend, and we'll start your education, both mechanical and motorcycle." As Maya hung up the phone, She realized that her life had transformed completely in the space of a single week. She was no longer just a waitress working her way through college. She was Heavy Johnson's daughter, with a legacy to uphold and a future to build that honored both her father's memory and her own dreams. 6 months later, Maya stood beside her father's fully restored shovelhead in Tank's garage, wearing leather riding gear that Snake had helped her select. She had just completed her first solo ride around the local roads, and the exhilaration she felt was everything her father had promised and more. The community center project was moving forward with support from 6 different motorcycle clubs, and Maya's business plan had impressed everyone who reviewed it. She had spent countless hours learning construction techniques from her father's old contacts, and her knowledge of both legitimate business practices and club culture made her uniquely qualified to manage the complex project. "Your father would be proud," Tank said, watching Maya perform the post-ride inspection her father had taught her years earlier. "I know he would," Maya replied, patting the shovelhead's fuel tank affectionately. "And I think he would be excited about what comes next." "What does come next?" Snake asked, joining them in the garage. Maya smiled, thinking about the plans taking shape in her mind, the partnerships being formed, and the bridges being built between communities that had misunderstood each other for too long. "Next, we show the world what Heavy Johnson's daughter can build," Maya said confidently. "And we make sure that everyone who rides these roads knows they've got family waiting for them, no matter what they look like or where they come from." As the sun set over the California hills, Maya Johnson, waitress, student, engineer, and daughter of a legend, prepared for a future that honored both her father's memory and her own vision for a better world. The road ahead was uncertain, but she had learned from the best teachers possible that the journey itself was often more important than the destination. The rumble of motorcycle engines echoed across the landscape as Maya and her new family prepared to ride into whatever adventures awaited them, carrying forward the values and dreams of a man whose legacy had found its way home at last. That looked once more at her father's motorcycle, gleaming under the garage lights like a work of art. Then, back at the faces of the people who had preserved not just his bike, but his memory. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For taking care of his bike, for honoring his memory, for welcoming me tonight." "No thanks necessary," Tank replied. "Family is family." As Maya prepared to return to the diner with Snake to retrieve her car, she knew that her life had fundamentally changed. She had started the evening as a waitress working her way through college, but she was ending it as the daughter of a legend, with an inheritance that included not just a motorcycle but an entire world of possibilities she had never imagined. "You don't need to say anything," Tank replied. "This is your inheritance, Maya. This bike, and everything it represents about your father's legacy in our community." Snake approached with a gentle smile. "Your dad was one of us, honey. Maybe not a patch member, but family all the same. And family takes care of family." Maya looked around at the faces of the bikers who had escorted her here, seeing them clearly for the first time. These weren't the dangerous criminals she had been taught to fear. They were people who honored loyalty and tradition, who understood the significance of legacy and family, who had spent 5 years caring for something precious simply because it was the right thing to do. But even as Maya absorbed the miracle of finding her father's motorcycle, she sensed that there were still secrets waiting to be revealed. Tank's expression suggested that he had more to share, and Maya had the feeling that her education about her father's true relationship with the motorcycle club world was just beginning. Tank pulled out his phone again and scrolled through what appeared to be a photo gallery. After a moment, he turned the screen toward Maya. "Because I know where your father's bike is." Maya stared at the photo on Tank's phone, and her world tilted completely off its axis. There, in perfect detail, was her father's 1978 shovelhead Harley-Davidson. The deep blue paint gleamed in the sunlight, and every detail was exactly as she remembered it from her childhood. "Where?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "About 2 miles from here," Tank replied quietly. "In my garage.ly. He says the secret is mixing 3 different kinds of meat and adding just a touch of Worcestershire sauce. Tell Pete he's got our respect," Tank said seriously. "Good food on the road can make the difference between a great day and a terrible one." As the evening progressed, Maya realized that her initial fears about the Hells Angels had been based more on reputation and stereotype than reality. While she had no doubt that they could be formidable when necessary, in this setting they were simply travelers enjoying a good meal and friendly conversation. Her father's wisdom about motorcycles bringing different people together had proven true once again. The revelation that would truly shock everyone was still to come, hidden in Maya's family history and waiting for the right moment to emerge. But even without knowing what lay ahead, Maya felt that this evening had already changed something fundamental about how she viewed both herself and the wider world around her.